This is very lovely of you to come, so thank you. My name's Joanne Gair. I'm the Arts and Public Programs Coordinator for the University of Tasmania in the Cradle Coast campus. I'm based in Burnie. Burnie's where the Pleakahilapulu people come from, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Always was, always will be. We haven't got the slides ready yet, but I might just give you a little bit of a blurb to start with. The University of Tasmania's Makers Program is the subject of our short and sweet presentation today. As a program demonstrating the social and cultural change possible through harnessing a region's craftspeople and artists, I can think of no better example. You may have noticed on the Artland's website that I had a slightly different proposal originally. This is because of the rapid changing landscape of cultural tourism since the start of the global pandemic has meant that our case study has taken on some of the traits of a cautionary tale and is perhaps all the more valuable for it. As an example, and we start to consider how we can make regional arts programs like ours more resilient. The photo here is of one of the city streets in Burnie. You can see we've got the banners flying there, City of Makers, showing the banner. We have Australia's largest handmade paper mill in Burnie, and those are Darren Simpson's hands making paper on the banner, and they're all through the town. First, a little historical context. Burnie in northwest, oh, that's the time I do this, isn't it? There we go. Burnie in northwest Tasmania was one of Australia's original dirty old towns, the home of the pulp, where 60% of Burnie's population worked at the paper mill. One of Australia's most infamously polluted cities, Burnie was best known for its rust-orange crusted coastline, tarnished by the city's other major industry, the UK-operated Thioxide factory, which produced chemicals for paints and plastics. It also rigorously pumped its effluent into Bass Strait between 1948 and 1996. And there are many stories of surfers going into that ocean, coming out vomiting. It was a pretty desperate state of affairs and considered completely normal. Immortalised by Midnight Oil in their song Burnie on the 1981 album Place Without a Postcard, Burnie was indeed a place without a postcard. It was unlovely, unappealing, and just another dirty town to drive through on the way to more picturesque places. In the late 1990s, tourism in Tasmania was beginning to hit its stride. On the foundations of Burnie's commercial papermaking heritage, a small, community-led handmade paper mill emerged at the old East Mill on the APPNM site. It offered handmade paper tours, workshops for tourists, and the creative paper mill provided free art spaces for volunteer artists to create life-size paper sculptures, and work for the Dole scheme made it possible to train and pay for a small group of disenfranchised youth to learn how to make traditional handmade paper and to become tour guides. The concept stood on the shoulders of Burnie's authentic industrial heritage and took off. Visitors finally had a reason to stop in Burnie. It was in 2004 that I joined this burgeoning cultural tourism operation as a business manager and creative director. Should probably add I'm a paper maker too. In 2010, the pulp closed its doors for the last time, and Burnie faced a cultural crossroads. Through an enormous amount of community engagement led by the Burnie City Council and involving intensive thematic interpretation workshops with Professor Sam Ham from the University of Idaho, the City of Burnie, spurred on by the success of the creative paper mill, made a clear decision to embrace its industrial heritage and maximise its latent tourism potential. Accordingly, a tourism strategy was conceived, and Burnie reinvented itself as the City of Makers. In 2009, after a substantial injection of federal, state and local government investment, Burnie declared itself open for business, with a bold new cultural tourism hub based at the foreshore, and that's our slide here. This formidable prize-winning beachfront building was designed by Tasmanian architects Terroir. It was the first time that they'd used this polycarbonate product in the building. This is a side note, really, but which was actually designed for NASA. It's an astonishing building. Makers Workshop opened to great fanfare as the repository of all things made by the Burnie community. It quickly became a place for the community to celebrate its stories and achievements. The building, which has become synonymous with Burnie, was cleverly modelled on shipping containers to reflect the portside activities seen through the building's windows. This is an interior shot of the main foyer. The Makers Workshop building co-located a new iteration of that creative paper mill I mentioned, a providore, a cafe, a busy visitor information centre, heritage displays, an extensive retail area, a gallery and 8 Makers pods, which were home for the members of the Makers programme. It was also designed as a cruise ship terminus to accommodate the growing numbers of visiting ships the city was attracting. In 2008, it would also become the headquarters for Tasmania's 10 Days on the Island festival for just a little while. I call this picture cruise ships and wood chips. Despite the alarming wood chip dunes, Burnie quickly developed a reputation as the most welcoming cruise port in Australia, as voted for by the passengers themselves. At its peak, Burnie attracted 47 cruise ships in a single season, carrying some 60,000 passengers. Our annual visitation numbers surged to 130,000 visitors annually pre-pandemic. Makers Workshop provided a much-needed home for the celebrated paper sculptures of Pam Thorne and Ruth Rees back in the days when they were based at the old East Mill. Over the past 12 years, Makers Programme has supported up to 40 artists across a broad range of creative disciplines, hosting an ever-changing roster of artisan encounters from 8 public-facing studio spaces. This version here is made from shipping container. It's the smallest of the studio pods of the 8 pods, which suited our miniaturist Joan Kelly perfectly. This slide features our wonderful milliner Susan MacArthur, who has been part of the Makers Programme since the beginning. Since launching in 2009, Makers Programme has supported over 100 artists and craftspeople. Making activities represented include a variety of painting techniques, printmaking, sculpture, illustration, sequential art, leathercraft, basket making, weaving, felt making, crochet, spinning, collage, toy manufacturer, I always get this word a bit wrong, but luthiers, guitar makers, and goldsmithing, a variety of handmade glass production, mould and decal making, encaustic waxwork, soap making, ceramics and shoemaking. In 2014, the University of Tasmania entered into an arrangement with the Burnie City Council to share management of the Makers Workshop site. The Makers Programme became a major community engagement initiative for the university's Cradle Coast campus and became a firm favourite with visiting school groups. The Makers Programme was expanded to include greater commercial and professional opportunities, whilst continuing to provide visitors with engaging, arts-based cultural experiences and learning encounters. In 2018, our makers turned over their first $500,000 in sales in a single year, an exciting milestone and confirmation that such a program was able to deliver commercial gains for its artists and in some cases even a generous revenue stream. Prior to the pandemic, Burnie's Makers Workshop had grown to become one of the most sought-after visitor experiences in Tasmania, so much so that TripAdvisor named us #1 attraction in our region. In March this year, Burnie was selected as one of 2 regional communities from across Australia to be studied by QUT as part of their Regional Arts and Social Impact Research project funded by the federal government, using us as a model for the ways that communities can build back better. So it's painfully ironic that in June 2021, in the wake of changing priorities at the Burnie City Council in response to the impacts of the global pandemic, that the council announced it would close its tourism activities at Makers Workshop and divest its interests at the site. This decision heralded the closure of Makers Workshop and the university's interests as they were at the time. The City of Makers may now be facing another crisis of identity. Or so it might seem if it were not for a new kind of makers program that is poised to emerge as UTAS opens its new Burnie campus only next week, right next door to the Makers Workshop. The future of Makers Workshop as part of the new campus precinct is assured, although the details are still being worked out. What is certainly true is that Burnie's Makers program will inform those decisions to ensure that the site continues their legacy as a place of vibrant making in the city of makers. Thank you. And this is the bit where I ask if there are any questions. Yes.
What happened to the building? What are they using the building for?
It's currently empty. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, closed and empty. Yeah, it's a hard one to swallow. It is a fabulous building, yeah. Any other questions?
Is it owned by council or by the university?
In theory, it's owned by council, but the university have a 25-year lease popcorn rent type of an arrangement, yeah. So essentially right now it's up to the university to make decisions about what it would like to do with it. And that's why there is some optimism around this, is that because it is right next door to the new campus, that they're not going to let it just sit there, and they want it to be part of a vibrant precinct that's going to include the new campus. New campus is awesome. It's green turf roof. It's going to be, it opens literally, I think it's Tuesday next week. So it's a really exciting time for the community. I just hope that makers can come with it.
Well, it should really, shouldn't it? Like,
You would think it's essential, yeah.
the university has 10 sheds,
Absolutely.
so it should really.
Yes.
Could you just explain when it was functional, how you managed the tenure of the artists?
Oh, sure.
And how it, rolled through in the selection process?
Sure, I can. I used to be the manager for the program. So essentially they signed on with an MOU. There was no fee for them to be part of the program. And essentially it was my job to provide cultural, creative opportunities, but also commercial opportunities. So they were fundamentally volunteers, but they were volunteers with perks. So that when we had a cruise ship, for example, coming through, we might get 3,000 people in a single day. And as a cruise ship terminus itself, the cruise ship passengers arrived at Makers Workshop from the port straight through on coaches. And so that's where they booked their flights, their helicopters if they wanted to, or their self-driving tours from, or they might decide to stay in the town and come back to it at the end of the day. And that's where they'd leave as well. So they had sort of two bites at the apple, as it were. And so the makers had an imperative to provide a commercial display as well as the demonstrations that they did that provided those learning opportunities and those cultural experiences. So, for example, one of my glassmakers was making $70,000 a year just from her volunteering. It's an memorandum of understanding. Yeah, so it's not as strict as a contract. There was a code of conduct, and there was certainly workplace health and safety standards around that, and principles that we required them to agree to. But it was an ongoing relationship, and so there was no. So certainly at the time, there was no. It wasn't like you're here for 12 months. It was just an ongoing, rolled over type of a sort of an MOU document. It might still happen, and I optimistically, I believe that there is an opportunity for the university to still celebrate making in the site. Whether or not it still looks like the Makers program as we know it or have got used to knowing it, I don't yet know. But from what I hear, taking the temperature of that sort of situation in conversations, there's a generosity for that to happen, and there's also, I think, pressure from the community to ensure that there is some form of making and vibrancy still at that site, but not for sort of individual makers per se. It's not that sort of a building.
Is the university consulting with the arts community and the makers on its decision making?
It's not necessarily going to be an arts. I've run a gallery there for the last 7 years, But I don't know whether or not the gallery is going to survive the process either.
And so, in case, are you starting talking with the makers there to perhaps just review it elsewhere? If it all comes to that, even if it's a bit of a...
They've already been disbanded, essentially. We have an amazing relationship. Like, there's this really beautiful connection. They're like my family. And so, yes, I regularly email them and I help them to try and get online and to find alternatives using portals like Etsy to try and sell their products. Some of them are very savvy already and have already been dipping their toes in these sorts of online, opportunities for a while. And then there are others who just have no interest in that side of things. What for them the value was the face-to-face meeting of people. Yeah. A virtual one. Yeah, they formed a virtual one. So there is a website called Makers of Burnie, and that's where they share information and organise events for each other and, raise questions as well. Yeah.
The council's decision, certainly from a faraway perspective, was the shocking one. Had the council changed substantially, or was it a surprise? Where did it come?
It was a total surprise. We thought that, obviously no one was expecting a pandemic, and it was a very strong knee-jerk reaction. We were told essentially that it was a financial decision. There was a change of senior management within the council,
Someone is invading the arts. The administrator just said that's costing money.
Agreed. Agreed.
I think.
So how, as a community, do you work towards changing those opinions?
Yeah, look, it's a process.
And to try and stop it before it happens?
And look, and in a sense, I had to change my presentation to one of posing a question of how do we protect organisations like this? Because at the moment I don't have the answers. I'm doing what I can to liaise with the people that are the change makers and the decision makers. But it's really hurt Burnie. And as far as an identity, it's like, okay, we had to completely reinvent ourselves after the pulp closed. We did it successfully. I mean, 130,000 visitors a year is nothing to sniff at. But now it's almost like, well, we trusted you on that journey, and there is some disappointment. There were street parades. I mean, people petitioning the council to change their minds. Probably the most concerning sides that I've heard from the council has been we have listened to the arts community consistently for a long time. We have no intention of doing that anymore.
Do you think in hindsight would you go back and be involved with the council, or would you consider private equity next time? Is that a...
Don't know. I don't know. And look, the council isn't the fault here. It's the pandemic and it's the response to the pandemic. So I don't want to lay the blame firmly there. But there have been some things said that are hard to ignore. And when you hear what the community has to say, it's painful. Yeah, it's painful.
Raise money and buy the building?
I think it cost $5.5 million. We'll do a whip round.
What's the art situation at the Burnie campus at UTAS, or is there an arts program?
No, there's no arts at the Cradle Coast campus. The art school courses are in Launceston, in Veresk, and in Hobart, Hunter Street, through the College of Arts and Media.
Just to follow on through that, I'm studying art at university here,
Mm-hmm.
but my medium is a craft.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to know, from your perspective, working in a craft-based industry, how do you develop that niche within the fine arts sector?
Oh, that's a tricky one. I'm a paper maker myself, but I exhibit as a fine art artist. I think art is a broad church, and I think that there is nothing wrong with approaching craft like an artist and the art and vice versa. How to do it, I can only speak from my own experience, really, and that's by insisting and just keep going. And so I've been a paper maker for 22 years. When I started to approach galleries in the UK and here, I was looked at like I had 3 heads. But once you can show, I mean, look, when it's good. And so when you're looking at something and you respond to it and it meets the artist's intention and speaks to the audience, then there is no difference, in my opinion. All right, if there's no other questions, thank you so much.